I was asked a really good question over on my Patreon page recently, and that is, when learning, say, an arrangement and you come across a very difficult chord for you, how can you adapt it to make it easier for you to play? And in today's lesson, I want to share with you 3 ways you can do that. So this lesson is all about simplifying chord voicings. And whilst we can come across very complicated jazz guitar voicings, and I'll share with one I've recently been confronted with in a minute, the great thing about the complexity of the guitar is there's so many ways you can voice chords that there's always going to be an alternative way to do something. It's just about knowing how. Now, I was most recently confronted with this when learning the transcription of George Barnes' chord melody of All the Things You Are. And the chord A flat major 7 was meant to contain the following notes. And it's got the third on the top for the melody note in that song. But what you're meant to do, which I couldn't do, is the ring finger there is meant to play 2 strings at the same time. It's meant to play fret 6 on the A string and the D string. And this is already a chord which is spanning 5 frets. So I was like, whilst I could maybe work on playing 2 notes with 1 finger. Maybe if I found a guitar with a really small fretboard width, I could do it. But I just thought that's not going to come. So how can I simplify that? And the first strategy I share with you is leaving things out. So it's keeping the shape pretty much the same, but leaving things out. And I think you can guess what I'm going to leave out. The finger which is upright, not barred, playing 2 strings at once. Because if I barred it, I would catch the G string and then I wouldn't get all the notes I want. So it's about knowing that this chord in this moment of the song is an A flat major 7. And it's got a C on the top. And then if you appreciate what notes are in that chord, A flat, C, E flat and G, in the particular chord voicing that the arrangement wanted, it went A flat, E flat, A flat, C, G, C. So there's a lot of duplication there, as you get in any 6-string chord really on the guitar. So there's 2 A flats, there's 1 E flat, and then there's 2 Cs. So we could afford to leave out a note. Now, easiest thing I could see there is to leave out the A flat on the D string. And then we've got 1 A flat, so we've now ended up with A flat, E flat, C, G and C. And the all important note in chord melody is the top note. So it's just really important that comes across, you know. It's still not necessarily an easy voicing. It's quite a stretch, you know, my thumb's really low on the guitar. It's not one I'd want to do for extended periods of time. But it meant I could still play the arrangement by just taking out that 1 note. It made that chord physically possible for me. So the solution there was simply to take out duplicated notes. But that would only work with a big chord voicing like that. Now let's take that strategy of leaving notes out with something simpler. I recently did a chord melody arrangement for Fly Me to the Moon, and the opening phrase went like this. Now that first chord, 4-finger chord A minor 7, it can be quite a clunky one to get into. That little finger kind of awkwardly placed. It's definitely one, when I play it, I feel like I have to, the cogs turn maybe a little bit more to make it work, if you like. If we're going to take things out, one thing we're not going to take out is the top note, because that's the melody note. But the other notes, so we've got A, E, G, C, that's root, 5th, flat 7, flat 3. We could simply try removing any of those, and you could argue some would be better to leave out than others, but let's try taking away the lowest note, which is the root. Then we're left with this E, G, C, so technically a C major triad, and then we go. See, I don't think that suffers too much. I mean, if you're playing solo guitar, it'd be fine. If there's a bass player underneath you, they'd be playing A probably anyway, so that would be fine. If we took out the next note, the 5th, with the little finger note, and we had, we could do it maybe fingerstyle, otherwise you've got to do some muting. So that'd be. Interestingly, the 5th is often a note people leave out of chords, but I'm not sure about that one so far. Let's take out the note on the B string, which is a G, and then we're left with. I quite like that. So we have the original. Take out the root. Take out the 5th. And take out the 7th. It's the melody note which is the important. You could just, if you want, reduce it down to the root, and particularly if you're playing fingerstyle, ways to do that, you know. So if you're confronted with a chord, you can always experiment with taking notes away, which might mean taking a finger away, might mean making something less of a stretch. But certainly when you're learning an arrangement and just like one chord, you hit the buffers, there will be another way to do it. And that's one strategy I would suggest you try first. And in particular with chord melody playing, one other thing you can do is, you know, in this instance, apart from the penultimate note, that G, every note in the melody is harmonized. So what you can effectively do is not harmonize every chord. So say if I went, all I've done there is harmonize the first and the last chord, and that's another way you can maybe get through it. Still sounds like the song, still sounds nice, and it's just easier to play. You might think it's less busy, actually sounds better, you know, it's personal preference. The second option is to find an alternate voicing. Say there's this really, really stretchy C major triad. It's a really nice sound, I think, but that's a big, big stretch. Not everyone can do that. So one thing you can always do with a chord voicing, again, this does rely upon your knowledge of the guitar, fretboard knowledge and harmony. This note here, the index finger, that's the note which is causing the problems. These two are kind of nicely, closely positioned. So could we change that to another string? That note's a G. We can actually get exactly the same note on the guitar just here. So I could go from this to this. Is there a difference? Slightly more mellow, the new way. This way is much more open. But it is a possible way to do it, to change the string. Another way you can approach it, if we go back to Fly Me to the Moon, that start chord. Let's say, well, I could think, well, I want to keep that note on the top. Do I know any other A minor bass chords where I could do that there? Well, I know this, there's an A minor triad here. And I could put the C on the top, like that, so we could use that. That could work. Or even A minor 7, like as a flat finger here. Could do that. Or that first way. And that still works. And this is where, if you know where to find the exact same note on the guitar, sorry, this C, if you go to the B string, you'll find the same note at fret 13. So if you know how to build an A minor up here, the alternative is maybe to play that up there. And that gives us an alternative to that, or like you could do different options. Obviously then, sometimes if you move yourself too far away, you might make the next bit difficult, but I could maybe go, I don't know, we could find other ways to do that. But then you're almost completely changing the arrangement, technically playing the same notes or whatever, but obviously it's very different where it all then falls. But there are other options, and actually, although when you're confronted with these problems it can be frustrating, it's also a really good learning opportunity about the fretboard, about how you can adapt things on the guitar. Now the third strategy is chord substitution. And the simplest way, I think, just to get you started, is using the relative major or relative minor of the chord you're having trouble with. So let's say they say minor 7 at the start of Fly Me to the Moon is a real pain for you. The relative of that, relative major of A minor, is C major. So I could use the C bass chord. And particularly, you know, like with bass players there as well, and they're going to play A anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But I think even in solo guitar this would work fine. I could find a C bass chord with that C on the top. So I could use a C triad. Like this, sorry. That's okay, maybe not so colourful. Or this kind of partial voicing of a C6-9. I like the sound of this. Maybe taking away some of the other chords and just leaving the last one would work too. So as you can see there, that's one way you can do, is by substituting for another chord which is closely related. I just want to finish by saying you don't want to turn your back on every chord that gives you a little bit of difficulty in terms of changing between them. Yeah, it does take time for us to acclimatise to a new chord shape, particularly, you know, when the fingers are in an odd position. But with practice, I feel like most chord shapes, unless it's a crazy stretch or like that crazy thing that George Barnes wanted me to do, those kind of chords, you can be like straight away, like, yeah, that's not going to happen. So you can think, I've got to find a different way of doing that. But I think just generally speaking, sometimes if we try and change too much, we end up overcomplicating things, and it's knowing when to try and adapt things or when to pursue a voicing and take your time to really get it. Don't also underestimate the physical side of playing chords, in the sense that your posture, sometimes, you know, the thumb going below the neck, sometimes I tuck my left arm into my body, sometimes I drop my left shoulder to make a chord voicing work. A lot sometimes needs to be done to make a chord change fluent, or to make a chord change possible sometimes. So never underestimate that. Anyway, I hope you found this useful. If you've got any questions or any other suggestions regarding this topic, then do leave them below. And in the description, do check out my Patreon page, where we focus on jazz standards every month and deal with all the important skills related to jazz guitar playing. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. Leave me a comment if you've enjoyed today's video. Don't forget, jazz guitar lessons every Wednesday.